I did a lot of research when making this video because I wanted to give you as much information as possible and not just come on here and say, you should learn British English. I learned a lot when researching, and I'm going to share this information with you today in this video so you can make an informed decision as to whether you should learn American English or British English. Now, the first thing to note is that in terms of taking an exam, like the Cambridge English exam, for example, it doesn't matter if you use American English or British English. Both are accepted as it is an internationally taken exam. And the understanding is that as long as you can explain yourself well in both spoken and written English, it doesn't matter whether you choose to do American or British English. One thing I would advise, though, is definitely choose one and stick to it. If you start answering your question with an S when you spell analyze, for example, which is the British English version of the spelling, and halfway through your answer you change to a Z or a Z, analyze with a Z, it can look like you're making a mistake as it's not consistent. So choose one, American or British, and stick with it. And I hope in this video you will find enough information to help you make the right decision for yourself. If you already know that you want to speak British English or American English, maybe this video can give you some helpful information as to understanding the differences between the languages and how the differences came about. So the first noticeable thing, of course, is the accent. American English is probably easier to pick up as nearly all movies and shows and music is produced with an American accent or American singer, or the actors are American or they put on an American accent. Even British singers sing with an American accent because it is understood that they will be recognized more globally, and their music is more likely to sell overseas and not just appeal to a British audience. Think about any famous singer nowadays. They sing with an American accent. Adele is a really good example of this. If you listen to Adele's speaking voice and her singing voice, they are very, very different. It's like two different people. But she has to do that to make herself sellable internationally. I think the only British singer I can think of that has sold out internationally with a British accent is Ed Sheeran. It is easier for English learners to access American English materials because, again, most TV shows, most movies are with an American accent. I know a lot of people learn English by watching the TV show Friends, and of course they all have an American accent in that TV show. If you want to find British English listening practice, you often have to tune into the BBC, which doesn't have the most exciting or interesting TV shows, or you have to find an online tutor like myself, and that can cost a lot of money. So often it makes sense to choose American English as it is so easy to find listening practice with an American accent. British speakers are also more literal than American speakers. Of course, this is changing as American English is having an effect on British English. But for example, something like catch you later would not be common in British English. We would be much more likely to say, I am not sure when I'll see you next, but see you sometime next week. Or, I'll see you next Wednesday for our next lesson. Or, it was nice to see you sometime soon. We're much more literal with the things we say. So there are less idioms and metaphors in everyday speech in British English. That might mean it's easier to understand a British person, but that also means that if you come across someone that says catch you soon or catch you later, you might not understand what that means. British English also makes the most of long and short vowel sounds. So for example, caught in British English, I caught the ball, but caught in American English, I caught the ball. Caught, I'm not very good at accents, but they would say it as caught, almost like C-O-T. So Again, confusion could be easy to come across in both. American English, you might misunderstand the sentence, but British English, there's so many more sounds and pronunciations for you to learn. In American English, it doesn't matter what your meaning is. Cot is the same sound, whether you're talking about a baby's cot or catching the ball. But in British English, if you were to say cot when talking about catching a ball, we wouldn't know what you were talking about. I have a lot of students tell me that American English is easier to listen to and easier to understand. I think this is because we tend to overcomplicate things in British English. So not only have you got the long and short vowel sounds in British English, but we also fail to pronounce the R sound. An American would say water. You can hear the R, water. Definite R sound, whereas a British person would say water, water. It kind of stops at the T, stops at the TE, water. We don't pronounce the R. As well as this, we add a Y sound to some words that doesn't exist. So for example, Tuesday, tube, stupid, attitude, there's like a Y sound in between the T and the U. Stupid. Whereas Americans would say it exactly as it's spelled. Tuesday, tube, stupid, attitude. The last thing to note about accents is England has more distinct accents than America. For example, New York, Texas, Chicago, they have distinct accents, whereas most of America, the accents sound fairly similar. But in England, basically every part of England you go to, in English we call these counties, not states, not provinces, we call them counties. So Liverpool, Manchester, Dorset, Guildford, Preston, Newcastle, every area of England, every city, every county has a different kind of accent. So American English speakers, if you come across an American, they're very likely to sound similar to what you've learned. Whereas in British English, you might come across more confusion because the English you've learned does not sound like the English you are hearing in the part of England you are in. Now we move on to the spelling. So actually this is very interesting. There is a huge argument between native speakers over which is correct, British English or American English. But historically, British English came first. It had a lot of French and Latin influence, which is why you see a lot of French words in British English. And Americans used the language in the same way. However, when American publishing companies wanted to start making magazines and newspapers, the printing houses were charging per letter. So American publishers reduced the amount of letters in a word to make it cheaper to print their magazines and newspapers. They removed the unnecessary vowels, as you can see in colour, flavour, rumour, humour, or the extra L, as you can see in travelled, cancelled, labelling. There are many other spelling discrepancies, such as the British English spelling with an S and the American spelling with a Z in analyze. But I don't think that's to do with the printing houses. I think that's to do with the phonetical spelling. So analyze does sound like a Z. It doesn't sound like an S sound. Honestly, I like the British spelling. I prefer the British spelling. I think it is the correct spelling. But I completely understand that the American spelling also makes a lot of sense. Why do you need a double L? Why do you need double vowels? It's not necessary. Maybe the British spelling needs to be relooked at and simplified. The final thing to look at and consider is grammar. The grammar and punctuation can be slightly different in American English versus British English, but it is only slightly different. And most good English teachers, whether they are British or American, will give you both grammar rules. Especially myself, in my video about the weekend, at the weekend or on the weekend, I do talk about the American version of at the weekend or on the weekend. I think it's important to know that in American English, the grammar is slightly different, the spelling is slightly different, because you don't want to become confused. And especially now, as we are seeing English be such an international language, there's going to be a mix of American and British English together. So it's important to be aware of the differences. The grammar in American English and the grammar in British English are both technically correct. So just make sure you are learning both of them, just in case. One thing I would note as well is that I believe that British people are more accepting of the differences. I think this is because, as I have said multiple times throughout this video, we are surrounded by American English, so we know and are aware of the differences in spelling and grammar and pronunciation. But Americans are not surrounded by British English as much as we are surrounded by American English. Maybe if they watch Pride and Prejudice or Bridgerton, sure. But their music is American English. Their movies are American English. I could go into the slang, but again, I think that's something that comes later once you've chosen your language, because you pick up slang through talking to people, experiencing the language, talking to natives. So you don't need to focus on learning American slang or learning on British slang. You'll pick it up naturally. But one thing I would say is that Americans come across a lot more friendly than British people. You could say it's superficial. It's not true friendliness. But for example, they will smile and greet you and wish you a fantastic day, whereas British people are more reserved, so we wouldn't go out of our way to wish you a good day. You may find that American slang is a bit more cuter and friendlier and easier to use than British slang. For example, awesome in American slang, great in British. Dude in American, bloke in British. Bathroom in American and loo in British. Shoot the breeze, meaning to chat in American slang, and chinwag, meaning to chat in English. But as I've said repeatedly, American English is infiltrating our language so much so that British speakers are using all of this slang on a daily basis. For example, dude, I would much rather refer to a friend as dude than I would bloke. I would never say the word bloke. Or guys for a group of people. That's American. Awesome or amazing or fabulous are typically American, and splendid or super are British English, but you are much more likely to hear a British English person say, oh, that's amazing, that's fabulous, than they will say, that's splendid, that's super. It's really not often that you will hear a British person say splendid or super, even though Peaky Blinders and Bridgerton may suggest otherwise. There's a lot of information in this video today, so the last thing I want you to consider is that American English has more native speakers, whereas British English has more speakers worldwide. So for example, there are 231 million native English speakers in the United States, but only 60 million, well, nearly 70 million native British English speakers in the UK. However, a lot of countries, other countries, base their English education system on British English, not American English. So for example, China, Japan, Thailand, Cambodia, they base their education system on British English, meaning you're more likely to encounter someone who has learned British English than you are someone who has learned American English. But you are more likely to encounter an American English native speaker than you are a British English native speaker. India has 125 million English speakers, and that is British English speakers. So that's something for you to consider. Why are you learning English? Is it just for fun? Is it just to watch movies and listen to music? Well, maybe American English is enough. But if it is to go into an international workplace, British English is probably what you need in order to communicate well with your colleagues, because they won't have all come from English-speaking countries, but they will have possibly learnt British English rather than American English. In my personal opinion, and this is just my opinion, British English sounds more professional and it's easier to listen to. I am, of course, biased because I am a British person and have been surrounded by British English speakers all my life. I have had experiences where American speakers cannot understand me, whereas I can understand them 100%. For example, when I was teaching American children, I asked them to put something in the rubbish. And as a British speaker, I know Americans say trash or garbage instead of rubbish, but the American children had no idea what I meant when I said rubbish. So just based on that interaction, I would say that learning British English is better in terms of being understood worldwide. However, in learning British English, you should also learn the differences and the other vocabularies that American speakers would use. It is, of course, entirely your decision. The differences in language are just differences in time and changes over time. So you are not wrong or right to learn either. Just do what feels most natural to you and fits your English speaking goals. If you do decide that British English is the language for you, please subscribe because I go through advanced and professional British English topics, and I have many videos explaining grammar both in British and American English. So even if you're interested in learning American English, it can't harm you to check out the British grammar as well. On that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope there was something in there that helped you make your decision. Let me know in the comments which you have decided to learn and why, and any opinions you have on either British or American English. So I will see you next time. Have a fantastic week. Goodbye.